This is a download from BFM 89.9, the business station.
Inside Story on BFM 89.9.
Good evening, this is Inside Story with Chwi, Lynn and Sharmilla Ganesan. Tonight, more Malaysians are slipping into poverty because of the pandemic. What does this mean?
Firstly, this comes from numbers announced by the PM. We're going to look into that. Then, reports suggest that women are returning to abusive partners because of financial pressures. Finally, do we need to be worried about structural unemployment?
So tell us, how do you think the government could address this growing issue of poverty in Malaysia? Call us 7733 2900, WhatsApp 018 789 8899 and tweet us at BFM Radio. This is Inside Story. It is 6:08, and today's story comes from not quite an announcement, but a sort of update from the Prime Minister in Parliament, in which the PM said that 580,000 households from the M40 have actually slipped into the B40 category. And for some context, that's actually about 20% of the M40 group. And this is to no one's surprise because of the economic fallout caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, but it also has knock-on effects.
So just to say that the B40 group has also been suffering a loss of income, right? So what this essentially means is that our absolute poverty figure here in Malaysia has risen to 8.4%. Just to compare, in 2019, that was 5.6%. So quite a big jump there. And this is coming from data from the Department of Statistics. And I think more significantly, all of these numbers, it's important to realize that we're not just talking about numbers. They have real ramifications. We're talking about real people. And loss of income, of course, doesn't only reflect on economic stability, but has effects in terms of people's ability to make long-term decisions, people's ability to make choices, seek help, to be able to just get the things that one needs to go on with life, because every choice you make is now tied to your economic strength.
Yeah, social stability, right, is what it comes down to. With this strain that is being placed on household finances, that has clear economic impact because, of course, people are spending less. People are less able to even consider making larger investments, never mind the day-to-day sort of purchases that we're talking about. So that's one thing. But then social fabric, I know it sounds like a very huge thing to say, but the fact of the matter is that we're talking about households that have different people to care for, that have their children's education to consider, that have their retirements to consider, that have the care of elderly people to think about. So it's a lot of different facets. And for example, one other thing that has emerged, and it's very much linked, is this issue of domestic violence, which we know there has been a surge during the pandemic, but now there's a more specific facets that's emerging from that, because victims of domestic abuse are finding themselves returning to their partners for the sake of ensuring financial security for their children. This is happening because the economy is struggling. People are unable to support themselves and their kids when they attempt to gain independence from that relationship. And on top of which, because of COVID-19 and the strain it's placed on our healthcare system, one-stop crisis centers at hospitals are overwhelmed and unable to provide the kind of assistance that they would have in the past.
So the Women's Aid Organization is urging the government to allocate up to 20 million ringgit for the upskilling and education programs for women, as a way of them being able to be financially independent and not have to depend on their abusive partners to survive, essentially. And this comes in the wake of a whole load of issues that have yet to be tackled, right? Many domestic violence survivors were unable to receive financial aid from the government because the Bantuan Prihatin Rakyat, for instance, have to be applied for as a household unit. There's also the fact that many survivors who have left their partners didn't go through a legal divorce because the husband didn't agree to the separation. This could mean that they don't qualify for aid. So there are a lot of issues here that need to be dealt with. All of which to say exactly what you said, that question of a social stability is not accessible for people who might need it at this point in time.
And since this was a conversation that began in Parliament, since Parliament is in session, and also because I think that there really is a need to look at this from a systemic point of view, we'd like to know what you think. How can the government address this growing issue of poverty in Malaysia? What kinds of conversations do they need to be having right now? Call us 77332900, WhatsApp 018-789-8899, and tweet us at BFM Radio. After this, we're going to be speaking with Dr. Shankaran Nambiar, Head of Research at the Malaysian Institute of Economic Research. So keep it here on Inside Story, BFM 89.9.
Build Fairer Malaysia. BFM 89.9.
It's 6:14 and you're listening to Inside Story with Lynn and Sharmilla. Today we are discussing the growing poverty numbers here in Malaysia, with specifically more M40 households slipping into the B40. And I think there is a serious question to be asked here whether these numbers are even still, these categories are even still relevant anymore. But we also want to hear from you. How can the government address this growing issue of poverty in Malaysia? You can call us 77332900, WhatsApp 018-789-8899, tweet us at BFM Radio. To discuss this, we are joined by Dr. Shankaran Nambiar, Head of Research at the Malaysian Institute of Economic Research. Dr. Nambiar, good to have you with us. Let's start off with this. What are your thoughts on the statistics that were released?
I think they're definitely very disturbing, cause for tremendous concern, but I don't think it's entirely unexpected. Given the severity of the pandemic, given the MCOs, a series of them, and with business activity having been disrupted, economic activity having been disrupted for almost 2 years, it's not surprising that the poverty levels have gone up. Definitely requires urgent attention.
So is the term B40 even still relevant?
I think yes. I mean, B40, you're trying to divide the entire population into groups, and you have 40% right at the bottom and 40% in the middle and 20% on top. So along those lines, yes, B40 would be a misnomer. But then I think if you are applying a certain income limit to this term B40, then I suppose it really denotes the level of income below which they fall. But yes, strictly, it looks like you're having more than 40% at the lower end of the curve.
And on that lower end, right, the B40 group has also suffered a loss of income during all this, resulting in this increase in the poverty figures. How do you foresee the situation evolving in the next few months?
I think those who were poor have become poorer. Those who were not so poor, those who were sort of in the middling range, they have also fallen under. So it's definitely not a desirable situation. The only silver lining is the fact that we are slowly starting to open up. Hopefully, there are no new waves. Hopefully, the COVID numbers come under control. And I suppose that's something that we can hope for, given the rate of vaccination. So I guess the worst is over, but that doesn't mean that we are in safe territory, because it's now really a question of how people get back on their feet. It's a question of how businesses recover. And if you just walk along the streets, you find that the number of taxi drivers has gone down tremendously. Many of them have sold off their taxis. Restaurants, many of them have closed shop. And all of that means that so much of employment is lost, that people will not have jobs going forward. To some extent, the employment that was given by the civil service, odd as it may seem, that has acted as an automatic stabilizer. Those who have been in government service, they've managed to retain their jobs and their salaries. So that seems to have helped to some extent small extent, perhaps. But one perhaps hopes that in the months to come and perhaps as the year rolls on and we move into the next year, things would get better. Having said that, you still have to deal with the problem of those who have lost their jobs, those who have lost their livelihood, those who perhaps have been selling roti canai by the roadside, or who have been selling sandwiches or nasi lemak or whatever. They're not going to fully recover until human traffic to the LRT stations, etc., picks up. So there's going to be a time lag before these people get back their jobs and their incomes. So there are things that have to be done in the short term, in the immediate term, and that's a question of urgency. And as we may look forward to longer term recovery, we have to fix immediate problems.
So, can our welfare system adjust to this increase in households who are now in this category?
I don't think we have much of a welfare system. I think, unpopular as this may sound, the pandemic and what has happened highlights the need for a better welfare system. We'll have to put in place more robust social safety nets. And hopefully the government doesn't see this as this pandemic as a one-off event, as some oddity or some quirk that has happened in our history, but looks at that as a lesson to be learned for the future.
So you mentioned immediate short-term measures. What needs to be put in place to address those needs, right? How can they be reached with the help and support required?
I think you have here a case of people who are quite at a loss as to how they are going to get about. It's very fashionable to say that you have to teach people how to fish, not give them the fish, but here you have a large section of the population that doesn't have the tools to fish. So I think, at least in the very short run, we need the kind of schemes that we have been running down for quite a long time. We need to give cash aids, the BRIM kind of assistance. I do realize that our fiscal resources are rather tight, but I think some of the assistance that will have to be given may have to be along those lines. But at the same time, I think you also need to look at how you are going to revive the SME sector. And especially those SMEs that are on the lower end of the scale, those that have less resources, less capital, and the microcredit institutions, the micro entrepreneurs. These are the groups that will have to be given special attention.
So, what else can be done to support these families so that they can get back on their feet?
I think that's what I was alluding to just now. We'll have to put in place a variety of measures, ranging from the equivalent of cash handouts to helping SMEs, especially the smaller ones, get back on their feet. And these SMEs perhaps will have to be given some kind of support for recovery purposes. You'll have to assist those companies which have been in the tourist, hospitality lines to reconvert the lines of business. So yes, some of the attention will have to go to the persons involved directly. reskilling them, etc., matching them for jobs, and also, aside from attention policies directed at individuals concerned, you'll also have to change the environment. You'll have to change the business environment and the kind of support that is being given to businesses. And also, I think that in his pre-budget statement, the PM had alluded to a number of areas that deserve attention, and he among them mentioned, if I'm not mistaken, women's empowerment, etc. And I think that also implies that we'll have to look at, for instance, single mothers, etc. So you do need a whole range of measures that have to be rolled out. I presume some of it will come out with the forthcoming budget.
And should we be prepared for longer-term social implications of this current crisis?
Hopefully, the long-term social implications will not be too severe. I think for all its inadequacies, the stimulus packages that were put in place during the pandemic, actually we are still in the midst of it, have not been terribly awful. And I think they probably did help to some extent in containing the damage. So hopefully we have gone past that where we have to worry too much about the social implications. But I don't want to understate the fact that it might take some time for employment to, the state of unemployment to recover, etc. So I think those are the kinds of issues that we need to look at.
And looking at informal workers, right? What can be done to support them and to ensure that we include them in this process of economic recovery?
Yeah, I think that's where you have the biggest gap. And by definition, they're informal, so they're not really registered. And reaching out to them might be a bit of a problem. And I think that's why you need these wider measures, the kind of BRIM kind of efforts to be able to target a wider section of the population, and hopefully you might be able to capture those who are in the informal sector.
And in the long term, to close off, how would we need to strengthen our welfare system to prepare for these sorts of, to prepare for future crises?
I think we have to change our model. I think it should be a model that is not entirely or so very heavily skewed towards attaining greater and greater growth levels. I'm not discarding the fact that you do need growth, but I think we do need to place more attention on well-being. We need to ensure that people have places to stay. They need to have good healthcare facilities, and they need to have jobs. They need to have to live in under good environmental circumstances. So I think all these factors have to be taken into account. So I think we need to emphasize that the fact that we need a slightly different growth model, and well-being in its broader context will have to be taken into account. And although that might not immediately yield very high rates of growth, I think that's the way to go forward. I'm not, of course, denying the fact that attract FDI, you need it's desirable for Malaysia to be a hub for investment, all that has to be done. But I think for far too long, we have ignored questions of social justice, of the paying more economic attention, more attention to the economic needs of the disadvantaged. So I think these should be the focus areas going forward.
Dr. Nambiar, thank you so much for joining us. That was Dr. Shankaran Nambiar, Head of Research at the Malaysian Institute of Economic Research, giving us some insight into the numbers that were shared by the Prime Minister, Dr. Sri Ismail Sabri Yaakob, in Parliament, which essentially found that 580,000 households formerly of the M40 category have now slipped into the B40 category, with people in the B40 category also suffering a loss of income, all of which has resulted in essentially more poverty in our country. And so we're discussing that, and we'd like to hear from you on this. How can the government address this issue? Call us 77332900, WhatsApp 018-789-8899, tweet us at BFM Radio. Keep it here on Inside Story, BFM 89.9.
Brainy, fancy material. BFM 89.9.
It's 6:37 and you're listening to Inside Story with Lynn and Sharmilla. We are talking today about the increasing numbers when it comes to households living in poverty, sliding into poverty here in our country, basically as a result of the pandemic. And we wanted to also, after this, look at some of the direct impacts that is having on our social systems, our social behaviors. But in the meantime, we're also asking you, how can the government address this growing issue of poverty in Malaysia? That number to call is 77332900, WhatsApp 018-789-8899, tweet us at BFM Radio. And we have some messages.
So Wafi says, my thought is that cash handouts, example the Bantuan Prihatin Negara, Bantuan Prihatin Rakyat, should come with mandatory upskilling programs and assessments. So Institut Keusahawanan Negara or the Institut Kemahiran Belia Negara can play their roles at minimum. I find that an interesting idea. If you would like to get back to us, I'm wondering whether you mean they should come, like as in you only get a handout if you upskill, or if you mean that they should come hand in hand, meaning both programs should roll out together. Because I do like the idea that upskilling should also be something that is offered. I don't know if it should be a condition.
So I guess I was thinking about the kinds of things that people talk about, which is, for example, being a single parent caring for 3 children, for instance. And if you say that your ability to feed your children on a day-to-day basis is conditional on also attending a course, I think that kind of makes it difficult. I agree that this idea of upskilling is a good one. I also have questions, however, about the efficacy of the upskilling, meaning if we talk about that, what is the quality of course that we're actually offering? Because if you're just saying like, here, I'll teach you how to code for a little bit and then hope for the best, that's not going to be enough.
And we've mentioned this every time we talk about upskilling. Is that particular thing going to be helpful for this person? What kind of upskilling is it?
So keep those thoughts coming. We'd like to know how can the government address this growing issue of poverty in Malaysia, because it really is so worrying. Call us 77332900, WhatsApp 018-789-8899, tweet us at BFM Radio. We'll be back for more of those in a bit. But for now, we wanted to look at something that we touched on earlier, which is some of the social impacts of this slide into poverty. And that includes, for example, women returning to abusive relationships because of financial pressure, because of the need to have that kind of economic security that is denied to them because our economy is in trouble. So we're going to find out more. And we're crossing over now to Charlene Murray, Service Director of the Women's Aid Organization. Charlene, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me on.
So how have economic struggles and the continuous lockdowns contributed to cases of domestic violence and abuse?
Okay, so for everyone. The loss of income is something that has been a big problem, right? With the continuous months of lockdown. But when we talk about a domestic violence survivor, it also means a loss of financial independence. We find that a lot of domestic violence survivors are stuck in the same household with perpetrators who are typically family members or even spouses. And being stuck in that same environment causes a raised tension, and not being able to go out to work or having a loss of income means that contributes to that tension. Also, we find that the lack of family and peer support is a very big issue for survivors of domestic violence being in a lockdown situation, and especially their inability to travel to safety because of out-of-state traveling being still limited, as well as the modes of public transportation after hours being limited. So those are typically one of the main issues why the loss of income is typically difficult for domestic violence survivors.
And we are also hearing reports that survivors are returning to their abusive partners because of economic struggles. Could you give us more insight into what's happening there?
Okay, so in lieu of what I was just talking about, economic independence is now a scarcity, and one of the many forms of domestic violence is not limited to just physical abuse, as we already know. It's also mental and emotional abuse, but also one of the biggest aspects that comes hand in hand with physical abuse, mental or emotional abuse, is the fact that there is also financial abuse. And financial abuse typically refers to a condition where the finances or the ability to have money or earnings is controlled by another party, which in most situations, if we're talking about family members, it would most probably be controlled by the perpetrators themselves. Now, the lack of job opportunities, raised cost of living, and having children in tow, the only rationale but desperate option for most women who are in domestic violence situation is to return to the perpetrator, who is typically the breadwinner. So I would say that based on the kinds of cases that we have handled over the past year, in fact, we find that a lot of women in desperation, with that need that they have to feed their families, to make sure that their children have some form of education and has a roof over their heads and food on the table, returning to the perpetrator is one of a very common issue that ensues.
So I wanted to take it away slightly from assistance and talk about the psychological impact, because how does returning to an abusive partner affect a person psychologically, especially in terms of their ability to finally make a clean break?
Okay, so when we talk about domestic violence, we always talk about the cycle of violence. I'm sure you've heard of how there's the honeymoon period, and then there is the period where raised tensions happen, and then there is the period of the abuse, and then back to the honeymoon period. And this cycle of violence is pretty much universal. It's something that is globally mentioned because in most toxic and abusive partnerships, that is the way abuse happens, where you have the honeymoon period before the abuse. And so when we're talking, so in regards to your question of how does it really emotionally affect a woman, knowing that she can't go back, she has to go back to a situation and potentially be in harm. I think being in that cycle of violence and knowing that the abuse part of that cycle will eventually happen, it's almost like playing roulette. The emotional and mental stress of walking on eggshells, trying to limit triggers within the household, and being dependent on the perpetrator for basic necessities affects the person's confidence, self-worth, as well as their emotional and mental health well-being.
Now, you touched on this a little bit earlier, but how has the pandemic and lockdown measures affected the process of providing assistance to domestic violence survivors?
Okay, so there are several ways that we can look at where the method of providing assistance has been severely impacted. For WAO especially, what we used to do was really a lot of face-to-face interventions We used to go to police stations, and we used to go to the hospitals where survivors are when they have an abusive episode and land themselves in a place where they need medical care and all. So right now, everything is limited to online interaction due to the pandemic. However, for WAO, we have very quickly had a change in the way we interact with clients, and we find that, in fact, it is no longer that big an issue of not being able to physically accompany a survivor of violence through the whole process of getting a police report, of getting an interim protection order if they are in a marriage under the Domestic Violence Act, and providing continuous case management support and shelter if they need any. But we do find that one of the areas which is particularly challenging is in the area of obtaining an interim protection order and having that interim protection order implemented. So previously, and previously in the sense of the last few months, a lot of police personnel who are also investigating officers for individual cases of domestic violence have been deployed for other needs, whether it is to man roadblocks or whether it is to assist in the PPV centers, etc. And so now, with it's only been a week after all, but with the lesser amount of roadblocks and lesser police station everywhere, we see cases which have been put on hold for months, resuming action again. So it was just a situational context where the investigating officer was not available to conduct the investigations of the case. So therefore, a lot of these individuals and survivors who have lodged a police report, who have obtained an interim protection order, were left in a limbo because the investigation was not able to be carried out in order for them to access safety as well as the due diligence that they needed. However, even though we have police officers now who are returning to their original roles, it's too soon to address if everything will return to normal. What survivors used to do is to walk in a police station, to get the letter, to go to court and to get IPO. Now everything is online. And we know that the ability to be online, to record a statement, the ability to provide information over the phone and online is really different and challenging as compared to face-to-face. And also that emotional stress of having a case and personal security in limbo for all these months, that is a harm that is already done. And survivors now have to hope that their cases can proceed as normal. And we are also hoping on our end that these survivors who have been waiting for months would be able to access the justice that they need.
What kinds of help do survivors need right now?
What kind of help do they need? Gosh, shelter, financial aid, emotional support, a place to stay while seeking safety. These are simple and very common things that used to be a little bit more accessible as compared to now. And I guess something that what we all can do is, as neighbors, as bystanders, is to know to ensure that if we suspect that there is a domestic violence case that is going on, or if we think that a friend in a marriage home we know is potentially rocky, has not reached out for a while, that we reach out, that we try to be there for them. And in any case, in the event that someone you think is in a situation of domestic violence, you can call 15999, which is Talian Kasih, or you can call Women's Aid Organization. Our hotline is toll-free and open for 24 hours, and our number is 03-3000-8858. And basically making sure that we do not carry forward the bystander effect, that if we see that there is something wrong, we go ahead and do something about it. We make sure that the avenues to provide support and help to the individual is made available.
Charlene, thanks for speaking with us today.
Most welcome. Have a good evening.
You too. That was Charlene Murray, Service Director of the Women's Aid Organization. I'm just going to run through those numbers again. You can reach out to Talian Kasih at 15999. The WAO hotline is 03 3000 8858. Again, Talian Kasih 15999. WAO 03 3000 8858. They're also available through WhatsApp at 018 988 058. If you are in an emergency, then the police is available at 999. After this, we are going to be shifting to talk about the issue of unemployment, more specifically structural unemployment. So keep it here on Inside Story, BFM 89.9.
Business, finance, and music. BFM 89.9.
It is 6:52. You're listening to Inside Story with Lynn and Sharmilla, and we are talking today about poverty, increasing numbers of people living in poverty, households living in poverty in our country. This was something that was shared by the Prime Minister. And of course, related to this is our issues of income, of unemployment, and now introducing a sort of new to us, at least, phrase, structural unemployment. That's what we want to talk about. As always, keep those thoughts coming, but we are crossing over to Dr. Carmelo Ferlito, CEO of the Center for Market Education. Dr. Carmelo, as always, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good evening.
So let's start off with an explainer, right? What is structural unemployment?
Yes, from the definition of structural unemployment is a kind of unemployment whereby in a certain geographical location in a country specifically, what the workers, the potential employees can offer is not what the employers want from potential employees. And this can be both a mismatch of skills, but can also be something more complicated, like a geographical mismatch. So like there is a demand for workers in a certain location, but that workers with that skills are not available in that location.
Do you think Malaysia is at risk of structural unemployment? And if so, why?
I think so, but I would be a little provocative, and I would say that my perspective is a bit different from the perspective that is often raised with reference to this issue, because often other economists or analysts tend to point in the direction that we need a labor market that is able to create more high-skilled jobs, and we need eventually also more high-skilled workers. But in a provocative way, I would like to say that the labor market will always be a pyramid. So there will not and never be high-level jobs for everybody. And this is something that we have seen also in Europe. So when you reach a level of mass tertiary education, you get a lot of potential future workers that get frustrated in their expectations, because everybody expects to become a manager, to become a high-level employee, and nobody wants to do jobs that in the past were instead considered dignified jobs. And in fact, the country where I come from, Italy, in Italy is much easier to earn money by being a plumber than by being an accountant or a sales manager. But because there is a high demand for plumbers, but there are no plumbers available, and often these jobs are covered by immigrants.
So considering all the factors here, as well as you rightly point out, the way that the pyramid, so to speak, has always worked, how might this impact our economic growth?
Obviously, we can have a continuous mismatch between what the workforce in Malaysia can offer and what employers instead demand, and therefore we will have continuously the need to inject foreign workers, simply because those skills or low skills or certain kind of jobs cannot be filled by local workers. So in the long run, I think is even higher dependence on foreign labor.
And what measures are needed to address this issue from the government?
I'm a very big fan for this problem of addressing the issue with an education reform. So we live in a world in which everybody wants to get access to tertiary education. And therefore, we believe that only colleges and universities can prepare you for the work for working, for being able to work and perform a job. Instead, I think that we need to rediscover the possibility of having a professionalizing secondary education. And this means having technical and vocational secondary schools, not only for practical works, but also for, let's say, middle-level white collars like accountants, sales managers, marketing managers. In my country, an example, the high schools are able to provide the skills for these kind of jobs. And university is instead only for scholarly works or for liberal professions, for very high-level positions. So this, I think, would help also to redignify certain kind of jobs.
What do you think is most needed at the moment as we look to recover from the economic fallout of all of this?
To cover this in a few seconds is, if I would be able to do so, probably I would be the Prime Minister. But I would say keep on in the direction of having a strategy to live with the virus and consider the situation in which we are as a situation that may last for long, and therefore adapt, get the situation as normal as possible.
Prime Ministership on the way. Dr. Carmelo, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
That was Dr. Carmelo Ferlito, CEO of the Centre for Market Education, talking to us about structural unemployment and whether that's something that we need to be concerned about. Of course, this hour, we've really been focused on the issue of more Malaysian households increasingly sliding into poverty. We'd like to know how the government could address this issue. Call us 77332900, WhatsApp 018-789-8899, tweet us at BFM Radio.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To find more great interviews, go to bfm.my or find us on iTunes. BFM 89.9, the business station.